Hello and welcome to MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chicks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And week by a special guest writer at MMO, Rivka Boord. Rivka, thank you so much for taking the time for us coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very nice to come on and talk some Mets.
Absolutely with the offseason here. And with that being said, obviously the Mets made their first sign the offseason as we record this podcast. Luis Severino heading from the Bronx to Queens, 1 year, $13 million deal. Obviously, probably not the pitcher Mets we're going to maybe start with. But it's the beginning of bolstering up on the pitching, something they're desperately going to have to do this winter if they want to compete in 2024. Before I get to you, Mike, I just want an initial reaction really quick to this signing of Luis Severino now going from the Yankees to the Mets.
Yeah, I think the Mets, we know, are going to sign more than one starting pitcher, right? This isn't the Wilpon-owned Mets. If this was the Wilpon Mets and they signed Luis Severino, you're like, well, that's the one starter they got for an offseason. But this is the Steve Cohen Mets, and this is kind of just a start, right? The Mets are going to sign likely at least two more or acquire two more starting pitchers. And look, Severino's got plenty of upside. He had a 3.18 ERA just last year and 19 starts for the Yankees, and we've seen other years where he pitched like a 2 or 3. And really the Mets are signing him to be or a 4 or 5. And that's what they need. I mean, this doesn't stop them from getting a Yamamoto, Erod, Montgomery. There's still going to be other starters that they bring in. So I think this is a good start to building up depth that is really bad outside of Senga and Quintana. We've talked about it, where David Peterson's going to miss the first couple of months. Lucchesi and McGill finished strong, but neither of those guys have a long stretch of consistency in the major leagues. So the Mets got one starting pitcher, and they certainly need more. And I would expect the two starters that they acquire outside of Severino are obviously a little more upper echelon.
Rivka, I just want to get your thought on the signing of Severino here as well.
So I had a few thoughts. I don't remember if I put this in my article in the end or if I cut it, but I had said something about them not necessarily being interested in Severino unless he was cheap. But I think my reasoning for it was, Steve Cohen had said in middle of the season that he was somewhat concerned about how much he was spending, and just in terms of it not being a sustainable strategy. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering if they start spending more at the bottom, if that was going to prevent them from spending at the top. And so my thought was, if you overspend for Severino, is that going to prevent you? Is that going to make you only sign a Yamamoto or only sign a Montgomery as opposed to signing both of them? So that was my main thought. If Severino is being signed as a number 5, and he's signed for $13 million, yeah, I think it's a little bit of an overpay, but that's also me maybe just thinking that pitchers who have 6.65 ERAs the year before shouldn't be getting $13 million a year. And also ones who can't stay healthy. So again, if it's a number 5 starter, you have a number 5 with upside of being as high as a number 2. It's definitely not a bad move. So in terms of, like, let's say giving it an overall grade, I want to see what else they do in the pitching in the rotation. But as if you're telling me that he's a number 5, I think it's not a bad move.
Yeah, and I think if you look at MLB trade rumors, who do a really good job of predicting these contracts, I mean, they hit Ronaldo Lopez right on the dot with his 3 year, $30 million. They had Severino at 1 year, $14 million. So yeah, that's pretty much what the market is for this type of pitcher. And I think you gotta pay a little bit for just the upside of Severino, despite the bad season that he had last year.
Well, that's part of what's interesting also. There are some other names on the market that I'm sure we'll get into that also have that same profile, where they've been good in the past. They have upside, but they're coming off a really bad year. I guess my take on that has always been, I'm not going to overpay for upside. That's just, I want to have actual concrete reason to believe that's going to work out. And that's why I think I mentioned in my article, which some of the commenters disagreed with, there were some other pitchers that I did not want to acquire. And that was my reasoning, was just, I don't want to pay, and certainly not pay in a trade. I don't want to pay for upside.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Mets are in a weird side here because like you literally have outside, Sang Katani, you don't have anybody else to fill out the rotation. So you got to do your best to get Bod. As you saw last year with the Mets rotation, really that fell off super quick into major league arms. It's going to be, like you said, it is a bit of an almost like Severino, who had like a 6.65 ERA, hasn't really been healthy the last few years. We understand. It's not about a 1 through 5. It's about 1 through 6, 1 through 7, 1 through 8 even rotations now in the MLB. So for someone like him who can slot in as a 5, a 7, a 6, whatever it is, and the upside of going into more of a front end of the rotation, and also probably someone that can slide it into the bullpen as well eventually. That they would and the worst that they can do. But like you guys are kind of saying, it's tough to judge it when we don't have the overall picture of what they did this season, because I meant that this is going to be one of many arms, and obviously, Rivka, you talked few in your article, kind of laying the Mets off-season plan should look like. I was wondering, as someone like a Dylan Cease, who I don't want to focus on the negative per se, but you do mention there's someone that you felt like the Mets should pay outside of like the upside that you're talking about, not trying to pay for that. Is there another reason why he's someone that has role? So I think that might be something the Mets also now with arms. I'm just kind of curious thought process there on a pitcher like Cease.
So I'll explain. My main thought process is that I don't trust the Mets current, at least as they're coaching, to be able to fix problems. I always think back to my first year as a full-time fan, which was 2004. That was my first year really following the Mets and every game and knowing what was going on. And the infamous Scott Kazmir trade for Victor Zambrano and Rick Peterson saying that he could fix Zambrano in 10 minutes. We saw exactly what that meant. And so I think my main thing is I just right now just still don't trust that the Mets have what it takes to be able to get right whatever was wrong with him. And that's really why I'm concerned about it. I'm worried. Yeah, if you can get him back to anywhere near what he was in 2022, obviously, you trade for him, especially if you can get him at a cheaper price than you would get if he was coming off the 2022 season. He still has control. That's ideal. My issue is even Stearns coming in and hiring new people, it's not going to take one offseason to be able to revamp so much that they're really, as Steve Cohen said, he said that in that same press conference, he said, like, our pitching lab has been, we just have a few months of it and other teams have years and years. So for example, it would upset me a lot to see Atlanta get Dylan Cease because I believe that they will be able to fix him. So we've seen Atlanta do this at times. We've seen the Dodgers do it, Houston, even Cleveland. Sometimes we've seen them where they just get these pitchers and somehow then they get them back or they get the most out of them. And if I had confidence that the Mets could do that, I would say, of course, make that trade for all these guys. Signing Severino is great. You have a guy with that kind of upside, like, of course. I think the main reason why I'm just skeptical about upside is just because what we've seen from the Mets in the past with signing guys who just don't pan out. And in fact, then they go to other teams and pan out.
Sure. Well, and I think it's, to continue on that, it's fine to be skeptical too, because the Mets didn't make a change and the pitching department at the Major League coaching staff with Jeremy Hefner. He's staying. And I don't think the people I've talked to with the Mets in baseball, there's not a whole lot of, I'd say praise for Hefner. There's not, well, if he became a free agent pitching coach, there's not a lot of teams that are going to be running out there to hire Jeremy Hefner. He's pretty much like a middle of the road guy that hasn't, like Rivka said, got a lot of out of pitchers. Look at what McGill did to start this year. Peterson, Carrasco had a really bad year. That's a little bit different because he's an older, but those are the type of younger pitchers that have pitched well in the major leagues before and didn't pitch well at all this year. And you didn't see a ton of change until they went to the minor leagues and made some changes there. Not that Hefner's not involved in that, but Hefner isn't seen as this big guru that's changing these pitchers to the fact where Rivka's talking about getting the most out of a guy like Severino. Maybe they still bring someone else in. They haven't hired anyone else to be on the coaching staff from the pitching side. Maybe they bring an assistant pitching coach. They haven't brought in a bullpen coach yet. We'll see what they do there. And another year of the pitching lab is certainly something that's going to help with the development of these pitchers and helping pitchers get back to where they were. And maybe that helps Hefner another year working with the guys that are doing that. Maybe that helps Hefner. But yeah, I think it's reasonable to kind of be skeptical of the Mets being able to get guys to bounce back. And I think that's really why you focus on a guy like Eduardo Rodriguez, who just had a really great season, arguably one of his best seasons as a pro. He had a 3.3 ERA, which is his best in the major leagues. He's a guy that's been fairly consistent. He's averaged 24 starts a year, 112 ERA plus. This is a guy that, again, I don't think he's an ace, but he's a 2-3, and that's what the Mets need. They need to be able to get a guy that's going to make 24, 27 starts a year and be an above average pitcher. They have a lot of innings that they need to soak up in the middle of this rotation.
I just wanted to jump in a bit of one other thing about Jeremy Hefner. I just feel like he's maybe taking, sort of riding the waves of DeGrom having become a much better pitcher. And I tend to put the credit for that more on DeGrom than on Hefner. So I feel like, or just even timing wise, like, people look at that and they're like, oh, or I feel like just, again, within the Mets organization, people speak so highly of Hefner. But as you said, there's no one outside the organization that really seems to think that way. And so, again, you just wonder, like, maybe it could be that there are other pieces that can still, improve the pitching besides the pitching coach. But that's why I would want the complete product. But then what you say about Eduardo Rodriguez, I have the opposite concern, which is, can he sustain that? So that's that. And that's really why my preference was for Jordan Montgomery, because I feel like he has a couple of seasons under his belt where he was pretty good. He had, he's had some tough times in his career, but overall he has a previous track record of a reasonable amount of success. And so I trust that more than I would trust a player coming off of one career year, although Erod's underlying numbers would still suggest that he's a pretty good pitcher, plus the fact that he might cost a little less than Montgomery, because Montgomery is also going to cash in on a really dominant run with the Rangers. So the price difference may also influence the Mets. Plus, Montgomery may be looking for number one type money. Rodriguez is more number two, high end number three type money. So that can make a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's the difference for me there is Montgomery, especially coming off what he did in the postseason. I think the prediction for Rodriguez was 4 years, 82 million, and the one for Montgomery was significantly more than that, like you said, coming off the postseason. And I think we talk about all of this, and that's just kind of me. I shouldn't make assumptions, but the Mets are certainly going to go hard after Yamamoto. I know we've talked about this, Sal. Just about every national reporter that covers baseball has talked about Yamamoto and the fact that the Mets are going to be going after him aggressively. And I just think I have a really tough time seeing a situation where the Mets don't end up with Yamamoto, or they go out and try to acquire someone that's at least has that 2 upside like they would be looking for. Yamamoto is, we talked about last year when the Mets signed Senga, we're like, well, they're signing a 2-3 with ace upside, and he showed a lot of that ace upside last year. I think Yamamoto is like a clear 2 and has probably, or maybe even a 1 definitely, and he has upper echelon ace like 1 material potential. So this is a guy that there's already talk about the interest being so heavy that when the offseason started that he was looking at probably getting 200 million, that we're talking closer to 250, breaking over the 250 into the 300 million, especially when you get talking the posting fee that's going to be at. it's so rare to have a guy of his skills hitting the market at 25. I know a lot of folks will say, well, he's coming from Japan and obviously he hasn't played at the top level yet. But as we know, the baseball in Japan is terrific. And we've seen Yamamoto pitch outside of Japan, and we've seen recently how some of that translates with Senga. And overall, pitchers coming from Japan have a pretty good track record anyway, especially upper echelon pitchers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with pretty much with everything you're all saying. Montgomery scares me a bit. I mean, he's pitched in New York before with the Yankees, had mixed success. I also you touched on it. I don't really want to pay for a premium on a guy who won't postseason run too. I know he won the World Series. I don't really love paying high on that. But it's interesting because we talk about Yamamoto, like you're saying, Mike, and as much as I hope that's for a front run, it seems like a lot of the big market all in on him. I would imagine it's going to be all similar money that's aren't going to get outbid, but it's going to come down to preference soon for him, and it's probably I find that it might be a bit tough to realize just because of these other markets that are going to be in. How close them are maybe contended away, that might have something to do with it. I don't know. But the best case scenario for me, Yamamoto signs quickly, the next few weeks, whether it was the Mets or not, or another team, and then they don't, the Mets can pivot. How you feel? I feel like if the Mets lose out on a Yamamoto, though, I'd be calling up key, and I'd essentially be doing a sign and trade for Ernst to bring in an ace on that, to anchor the staff. You have your front two in the front of the rotation, no matter what they have to. And it's funny you're saying about Yamamoto that the two with the upside of an ace, and even more. If I'm paying you $250 million out of two, you are number one. You are the ace. You are the horse. I want you to be Dwight Gooden. If I'm giving you that much, where you're coming from. So interesting to see how these expectations affect him and all that. But like you're saying, our players, especially pitchers coming from Japan, not a worry. That's obviously a league we know now that is super, super competitive. And like you said on the pitch, it seems to translate very well, guys on a high level coming from there to here. So hopefully they can make it happen. It'll be interesting though, because like I said, it'll also probably be the first time the Mets and the Yankees are fighting over a player. We talked about that the last time as far as with Yamamoto, and maybe even Juan Soto, but later that's a little different story. But they could be fighting over a little trade there too. But be competitive, and there's just it's pitching, right? That's the theme of the next few months. But I want to kind of transition from players that were signed the pitching side to Mike. Was talking to us a little before off camera and had mentioned that the Mets have been talking. Joey Wendell, he was a Marlins shortstop last year. Not very. Luis Guillorme replacement type, but Mike, why don't you fill us a little bit about Joey Wendell's 2020 season?
Well, he wasn't very good in 2023. And the Mets, now that we've seen updated, the Mets have indeed signed Wendell.
Okay.
I believe
breaking news.
I believe the figure was $2 million for a year. I guess. Well, we know the Mets need a utility type. They outrighted Danny Mendick off the roster. They non-tendered Luis Guillorme. So there's not a whole lot of depth there in the backup infield at the major league roster. And there isn't a ton at the AAA roster either. So this is a back of the 40 type move, right? If he doesn't do very well in the year, you cut him. But he had a couple of good years with the Rays, but yeah, he was not good for the Marlins. Yes, last year with a 50 OPS plus, and there's not a ton of good to say, but besides the fact that he's versatile, he's got a little bit of speed. He's on the older side. He's 33, so you got to kind of hope that maybe he can get his offense back to where it was with the Rays, where he had a couple of above average offensive seasons. So. But there's not much risk there, obviously, with a 1 year, $2 million deal. But hopefully you'd like to see the Mets certainly get some more on the bench to kind of improve that, especially from an offensive standpoint.
Rivka, what do you think? I know we talked before the show started, but I think you laid it out pretty well for us about Joey Wendell.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's again, 1 year, $2 million. I guess I'm okay with that move. Again, I just don't want to see that. Like, I don't know. It feels a little bit like the Omar Narvaez move last year, even though he was supposed to be a platoon or even a starter, but a little bit okay. It's low risk. Yeah, as you said, like you can cut him if you have to. I don't kind of like Severino in a way. I want to see what else they do. If you're telling me that Wendell is playing as much as Guillorme has for the Mets, that's a big issue. If you're telling me he's this spare guy, we have a question whether he's even going to make the roster or something like that, or he's just our veteran that we have around. Okay, fine, I'm okay with that. If you put him as anything more than that, that I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I would imagine quadruple A, as they say. Filling out like Mike said, the back end of that 40-man roster. But exactly, if there's if Joey Wendell's getting some playing time in 2024, things have gone horribly wrong. And I said that I felt last year. So hopefully this doesn't happen again. But talking about positions, I want to transition there. Obviously, Mets need help at third base. A lot of help. He obviously didn't have a good year at all last year. Now there's kind of questions on his development and going forward now. A name that's been floated out there has been Justin Turner, possibly reunion. He might be 45 years old at this point, but he still had a decent offensive season last year. Granted, it was and was mainly playing first base there. But I kind of just want to get both your thoughts. Possibly a reunion with Justin Turner, and one other name as well that I've seen kind of float around there as far as for DH, another former Red Sox, JD Martinez. I don't know what you guys feel about kind of those veterans for 2024, but Mike, I was just kind of curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone like Turner makes a ton of sense. I think Turner himself does make sense just because he does give the Mets some protection at third base. Obviously, he's at the point in his career where he's below average there defensively, and he's not going to play there a ton, but he gives the Mets some depth there. Obviously, I think he's an upgrade at DH from what they've had the last couple of years. He can back up Alonso at first base. But I think the biggest key there is that he gives you options, right? Daniel Vogelbach was a DH only that could only DH against right-handers. Turner can hit lefties, righties, and he can play a little bit of third, a little bit of first. So I certainly think he makes some sense. And Martinez obviously doesn't have the versatility of Turner, but he's obviously also the better offensive player at this point in his career. Both of these guys are older, but I mean, we're talking about the DH spot. These guys are going to slot into DH, and these guys are mashers. Like that's what their job is to do. And both of them still have power. I mean, Martinez has more power than Turner, and the Mets need that power. And I won't mention the other name because I know Rivka mentioned it in the article, so I'll let her throw out the former Philly.
Yeah, so I think my preference, you had mentioned if things in a trade, but my preference, the bat that I think would fill that role the best of the power bat that you mentioned is Rhys Hoskins. I'm not obviously it's ideal. It's better to get someone who can also play the field, but I think just in terms of that pure power, he's the best thing that you can get. They've really lacked that power hitter other than Alonso. Yes, Lindor has power. He had a 30-30 season. But that's not his ideal role. His ideal role is to also hit homers, not to be a home run hitter. And I think they've been lacking that, and they've been trying to turn non-power hitters into power hitters. Instead, just sign someone whose number one thing is power. He probably comes cheaper than he would have otherwise because he missed the whole season with the torn ACL. Some people might be concerned about the torn ACL. I hear the concern. I still would go with the guy that has a pretty consistent track record of just having good power. The one concern I might have is that he played in a bandbox. I haven't really checked his home road splits, so I would look at that. Citizens Bank or whatever they call it nowadays. I don't necessarily keep up with that, but it was always known. To be, Philadelphia, the ball flew out pretty well. So if guys coming to Citi Field, that's always a concern because the park factor on that for home runs is always knocks down home runs. So I would be that's my one thing that I would just look into, but I prefer Rhys Hoskins. I'm fine. Look, I think I even mentioned Justin Turner. The one thing I saw is that I think I saw a projection that he was going to make 17 million, which to me was a little much for a guy who's 39 years old. But again, that's me being concerned primarily that that's going to preclude other moves. If Steve Cohen's just saying, I'll pay whatever it takes to get whatever guy, then I'm like, okay, I don't really care what you spent. It's not my money.
And I think Hoskins also, right, it's a 2-year deal or it's a 1-year deal with an option to get him back on the free agent market. He gives you some Alonso protection too, right? Say Alonso leaves and you sign Hoskins to a 2-year deal or a deal that that locks in if he hits a number of plate appearances. That's this type of thing. He gives you some protection if Alonso leaves. And another name that I was actually looking at today that we're talking about just pure power, and I think that's Mitch Garver. He obviously had a pretty good year with the Rangers. He's a guy that does have injury concerns. That's every year he seemingly misses a little bit of time, but I think he gives the Mets protection at another position too, right? At catcher, Narvaez was not good for the Mets at all this year. Alvarez is still a young catcher, so Garver gives them some protection there, but he has really transitioned to a DH role. He only caught 26 games this year, but Garver still had a slugging percentage of 500, which is the second time in 3 years it's been at least 500. He had a year in Houston where he had a slugging over 600. And he has a little bit of first base experience too. So I think the general notion here is that if the Mets are going to go out and get a guy that's going to be mostly a DH, it's got to be a guy that has power.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they've talked about, they've lacked that the last few. DH has been a revolving door. They've tried to use it as a weird spot to rest guys and whatever else. And it's a position that they need to address now. To just lengthen the lineup. Rivka made a good point as far as protecting Alonso, somebody else that can hit behind him. And it not fair to put that on Alvarez yet, I feel. So to bring in another veteran, really thumper like we're talking about, really, that kind of that paid bomb, I think would be great for for this year and kind of help not only protect Alonso, help Alvarez's maturation, but just giving them sorely missed the last few years. And man, oh man, JD Davis trade gets worse and worse every year. But we don't talk about that. Mike, you brought up Pete Alonso, which I think is a good transition. Obviously, Pete was around the New York area. Went to the Macy's parade. Holiday here was just on one of the local New York programs. Did something really good. I believe with Wounded Warrior. Got a service dog for and then came out and surprised him on the broadcast. Signed bat, the whole deal. He was at the MSG night, rocking his York of Nowhere shirt. Obviously, there's nothing really new on the contract talks, but just want to talk about him in general and the million reasons why the Mets should sign him and he's here forever.
Well, I know in Rivka's offseason plan, which we're kind of referencing because she just did the article for MMO, she come out and says that part of the big thing is making sure that the Mets extend, re-sign, however it works out, Pete Alonso, and that he stays with the Mets. I mean, there's just we've talked about this a lot, Sal, but I think it's one of those things that I think is a key thing for this offseason is to really make sure that you lock Alonso in so that he's staying with the Mets long term. It just answers that huge question, and it allows Stearns to focus on, look, Yamamoto's still out there. Ohtani's still out there. I mean, we haven't even talked about Shohei Ohtani yet, who is obviously the biggest free agent there is. But that's what locking in Alonso long-term allows him to do, to really make sure that he's going out and make sure you can get like a Yamamoto, another pitcher. We're talking about DH. We're talking about maybe a backup third baseman. We haven't even talked about the fact that they need help in outfield, or the fact that they need probably 4 or 5 relievers. So getting Alonso off Stearns' plate would certainly go a long way, and also making sure that the rest of this offseason he's able to get all of the holes that the Mets have. I mean, at one point, I can't remember what it is right now, but at one point their 40-man roster was at 28 or 29 people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's unheard of to have a 40-man roster that low, and that's because the Mets, Stern has kind of taken care of the dead weight that was still left there from the Epler regime of just depth pieces that really weren't even major league caliber or borderline major league caliber. And for the Mets to be good in the short term and in the long term, they really need to improve their depth at essentially a lot of positions like we've talked about.
Yeah, so really the question is, again, can they do that in one off season? And that I think that was the larger point that I was making in my article, which is the most important things were get Alonso done, get your starting pitching done, and get a big power bat. All the other things I put in there were my opinion, but you can change that a little bit. You can, kind of move it around. But to me, and then I think I also put that you have to get a setup guy who can do it. Hopefully you can get them in for a few years, not just for one. Again, the bullpen, I said I prefer not to sign David Robertson. That was also, by the way, a nod to, will that preclude other moves? If he's going to sign Robertson and still go out and get a bunch of other guys, sign Robertson. Why not? People said at the worst, you can flip him at the deadline again and get someone else. So, that part is fine with me, but I don't think you can start signing guys left and right in the bullpen and expect to fix it, because honestly, even if you sign a bunch of guys, chances are a lot of them are not going to work out, just because that's kind of how relievers work. I remember that going back to Aaron Luke when we were also upset that they let him go. Guys you get with relievers, you get what you get, but you try to sign maybe one. I think I was originally going to put in that they should get a long reliever too. I kind of pulled that out because I said, okay, I'm putting too much in this article. But I think that the place that I decided to neglect largely in my article was the bullpen, because I just said it's too much to go in one season is to fix the entire pitching staff. Again, if Cohen wants to spend $500 million, fine, go ahead. But I just think he's going to draw the line somewhere, and I drew the line at starting pitching. at relievers. We can have a discussion about that. Which would you prefer to leave that open? Would you prefer to leave in maybe some of the infield positions open? Let's see what the kids have. And let's say you said a third base where they really could use some sort of third baseman that can help. Maybe you do want to give Beatty another shot. Maybe you want to let Beatty and Mauricio battle it out and sort of, depending. Maybe you want to give both of them a shot and stick McNeil in the outfield. We can have discussions about that, but I think the core thing is starting pitching, get Alonso done, and get that big power bat.
Well, and I think kind of to that point is where you're talking about, well, maybe you don't spend a ton of money on the bullpen. And I think that's really where Stearns comes in, right? He's done a good job of building bullpens without spending a bunch of money between signings, trades, the development that they had in Milwaukee, claims. I mean, he's done a good job of just finding guys on the scrap heap. So that's part of obviously what's going to have to occur for the Mets bullpen to be good for next year, is that they're going to have to find some guys on minor league deals or one-year deals worth $2 or $3 million, guys they claim off waivers, maybe a Rule 5 pick, these type of things that they're someone they develop during spring training. The bullpen's going to have 2 or 3 guys that you're just kind of like at the start of spring training, like, all right, this is just the depth guy, and he's going to have to kind of take off and have a really good season. I mean, like I said, we've seen that with Stearns and the Brewers. So that might be the area where he really gets to shine this offseason. Because like you said, I mean, Cohen has a lot of money, but there's also a limit, especially, I mean, if they do sign Ohtani, or even Yamamoto is going to get potentially close to $300 million. So you're either one of those guys, you're talking about a lot of money. And so there has to be a line somewhere, and there has to be a spot. So I think if you are thinking of that spot, I think Rivka makes a good point about it being the bullpen. And I think she also made a good point about the younger guys. You kind of have to pick your spots where those guys are going to have to play. And I think when you do, I think you have to give these guys a full chance. I know on that topic, we should mention that Ronnie Mauricio is going to play starting in a couple of days. He's going to play in the Dominican Winter League, and it sounds like he's going to play mostly third base. So that'll certainly be something to watch for the Mets and Mets fans to see. Mauricio hasn't played a ton of third base, so to see how he gets comfortable there and to see if they can finally kind of get him to shift his philosophy offensively where he's not chasing out of the zone as much. I mean, we've seen the power in spring training. We saw in the minor leagues. We saw in the major leagues that he does have some great in-game power, but he chases too much outside of the zone, and that's just not something that's going to translate in the big leagues to a guy that has a ton of success, even if he does have that power. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in the Winter League this year. He won the MVP award last year, but let's see how he does defensively and see if there's kind of a change in how he's attacking each at bat.
Yeah. Sorry. No, so the thing is with Mauricio, I mean, I think for most people, Vientos is like an afterthought at this point. Just because, again, the fact that he really can't play the field, like even though Beatty struggled, Mauricio has his things in the field. Vientos is by far the worst of the three. So I think to most people, like, I don't think Vientos is going to be on the opening day roster. But I do think Mauricio and or Beatty will be there. I'm not sure about both. I'm not sure about one. I'm not sure how they're going to do it, how they're going to choose which one. I still prefer to give Beatty a shot because I think he has the biggest chance of being that guy. But again, we'll see. I have a feeling they're just going to let them battle out in spring training, and whichever one kind of looks better is going to be the one that they're going to give a shot. But as you said, we'll definitely take a look at it in the winter in the Dominican League. You have to. The one good thing potentially about Mauricio is if you can get him to play an adequate second and third, potentially you can have a little bit more versatility. Whereas Beatty, we've just been trying to pigeonhole him into third, and who knows if he can even play there. Just seems like there's some mental block with him playing the field. So you're going to interject there?
Well, I am, but I'm going to kind of change topics because we got on the Dominican Winter League, and I had me thinking about the news that I reported on Tuesday night that the Mets are expected to sign Vladi Guerrero once the new IFA period starts on January 15th. I say expected to sign because it technically can't be official that it's happening until that date. So he's Vladimir Guerrero's son. He's Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s brother, and his name is Vladi. Trying not to confuse anyone, but that he's 16, and so that he stands out from the other two, he hits left-handed. He did a showcase at Lone Depot Park a couple of years ago and was hitting home runs 400, 430 feet plus as a 15-year-old and pretty consistently. Obviously, there's power there. He has played to this point, played mostly in right field. Obviously, I think there's a pretty good chance that he probably ends up at first base, which is why he's a lower bonus guy. I believe his signing bonus is going to be right around 100,000, which obviously isn't like the upper echelon, but certainly interesting to see that the Mets are going to have they had Gregory Guerrero that they signed a couple of years ago, who is his cousin, but they tried very hard to get his dad to come to New York. They tried to get his brother to come to New York too. They were certainly in that sweepstakes too. So now the Mets did get a Vladi Guerrero.
That's funny. The Mets tried his little brother a couple of years ago too. They have Acuna's obviously little brother. Hopefully, the Mets' philosophy is they can't get the two really good. So hoping maybe the younger brothers will do it. But speaking of Guerreros, I this made me think of, I don't know if you saw that proposed trade the other day. That said the Mets should trade Alonso and Jeff McNeil, the Blue Jays, for Vlad Jr. and Alek Manoah. Now, David Stearns, I didn't go to Harvard. You got a Harvard degree. But if you do that deal, I'm going to call up the registrar. I'm going to have them take your degree away because that would be horrendous. Even as I'm afraid to laugh at, I don't even know how anyone can entertain it. You're not going to trade. You're essentially trading for the same. You're swapping the same player, Alonso and Guerrero, who also have the same control. So they're both in their walker, I believe. And then you're trading McNeil for a pitcher who can't pitch in the major leagues anymore, who went down to the flex league last year and refused to get in shit, do anything else after it. So I don't know where some of this is from. I guess it's just no. But I don't even know how anyone could entertain that, even in a video game that would get denied. So I don't know what that was about.
Well, I mean, we were kind of in a lull of the offseason where nothing had happened, right? Now today, the Mets are finally making some moves. Sign Severino, sign Wendell, and the winter meetings are coming up starting on Monday. And actually, I'll be at the winter meetings covering it for MMO. We haven't decided which night, but we'll do a show live from the winter meetings one of those nights and kind of cover what's going on. Hopefully, I mean, they're still, like we've talked about, Yamamoto, Rodriguez, Montgomery, Ohtani, obviously, JD Martinez, Justin Turner, Cody Bellinger still available. There's a lot of the key free agents are still out there. A couple of the pitchers have signed, but there's still a ton of big players out there. So I'm guessing it's going to be a pretty eventful week. The reports on Ohtani, especially early this offseason, were the fact that he would like to sign fairly early, potentially around the winter meetings. So I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on for a while there. And hopefully we get some big news from the winter meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we can break some big news live on a show here. That'd be great. If you know us, David Stern, Steve Cohen, we'll get somebody on. It'd be great. But that should be a lot of fun. Winter meetings is always, and like you said, hopefully a lot of these big fish kind of fall during that week. I know that tends to depend more than others, but that's when a lot of things tend to heat. The hot stove tends to heat up. So hopefully it'll be eventful week for the MMO team there. Hopefully, eventful in a good way for the Mets, signing key free agents there. But I think that's going to wrap everything up for this week's episode. Thank you so much for coming on, for talking about your article with us. Catch everything that Rivka is going to be writing all off season, and then obviously season as well. But as far as we go, like Mike said, he'll be at the winter meetings, and we'll update you everything as far as what's going on in the off season from Yoto and beyond. But as always, it's all Mets.